Welcome and good evening to Holocaust Museum's Houston's virtual programs. And thank you for joining us this evening and for your support and involvement as museum members. I'm Dr. Kelly Zuniga, CEO, and it is my great pleasure to welcome Selven O'Keef Jarmon as our guest speaker tonight, who will lead our conversation about visual work influenced by South African culture and new democracy. We're very, very fortunate to have the traveling exhibition Mandela Struggle for Freedom on view at our museum until January 3rd, 2021. And if you live in the Houston area, I encourage you to visit the museum and see this absolutely incredible exhibition before it closes. However, before we start this evening, I'd like to mention a few things. We will leave time for a brief Q&A at the conclusion of Selven's talk. And to participate, please submit your questions through the Q&A box, which can be found at the bottom of your screen. We will do our best to get to as many of your questions as possible. And this program is being recorded and will be available through our YouTube platform at a later date, probably within the next 48 hours. And now it is my great pleasure to introduce our speaker, Selven O'Keef Jarmon, a Houston-based artist whose current work embodies the social sculpture practices as a way of including public participation in a work that is connected to a broader cultural and social ideas. Within this work, Selven explores the ways in which social and cultural norms lack facility to translate differences and in a natural life setting, but also opens up to a well of thought and potentials within active visual spaces. So Selven, welcome to this evening's program, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Kelly. I appreciate you and the Holocaust Museum for having me here as a guest speaker this evening. I truly appreciate it. My thoughts go back to the first time I actually went to the Apartheid Museum in Soweto, which was 2003. And I remember this feeling of heaviness upon going to see it. Before I got to the actual museum, there were kiosks outside of the museum with people that did craft from all over the country. I don't know if they still have that now, but at the time. Now, mind you, the democracy is still pretty young, even now by standards. But then we're talking about less than 10 years, because this was 2003 and their democracy began in 1994. But I remember saying when I saw the craft items outside, I was so excited. I was like, oh, I want to see this and this and this. And but I said, I'll wait until I go and see what's in the museum. And I never forget, after coming out, I was so heavy. My heart was heavy, my mind was heavy. I attempted to look at the items outside, but it was difficult. I couldn't focus. I had to go back to my hotel and just rest, because I felt like I was just at a close degree of separation with everything being there in 2003, with the culture, with the people at the same time. And I just left the house museum in Soweto, the place where Nelson Mandela actually resided after he got out of prison, which was also heavy, but not like the Apartheid Museum. And I just want to say to all of the listening audience out there, if you have not got a chance to see the exhibition, I would encourage you to please see the exhibition, especially at this time of an individual who's lived such an examined life. And to see this exhibition at a time where people like Nelson Mandela, other individuals that have fought so hard for the rights of humanity, seem to go out of fashion like clothing, as information moves so quickly and people are on to the next thing. It's a good reminder, of where we are, a nice little litmus test, to reflect upon and to look at it through the prism of what we're living through right now. For this evening, I have a film that's prepared for you. And the film covers 5 key projects that I've worked on as a social sculptor. The first is The Ballad of Here and Now, which was a collaborative work with artist David Wayne McGee that was set at the Rhode Island School of Design in 2001. And mind you, this was just days after the World Trade Center bombings. So that was important for me because that actually put me on the path of the work that I'm doing now. The second project is a piece that was on exhibition at the Contemporary Arts Museum called The Names on the Deed. This piece is important because you'll get a chance to see it through the lens of images of my first trip to South Africa, which is what the piece is about. So you'll see the piece pop up and you'll see images around it, which speaks to the piece itself. The third piece you'll see in the film is about a piece called Quanda, which was the actual reality television project that I worked on in Johannesburg. It was filmed throughout all over the country, and it just involved just lots of people. I think the cast was about 600 individuals. And it was a real reality television show, not like what you see mostly in American TV. It is not scripted. You got the real deal, real issues, the reality of real life of individuals trying to make their lives better. The fourth project is the 360 Degrees Vanishing installation at the Art League that involved the 16 leaders that traveled from the rural Eastern Cape, funded by the Eastern Cape government, to be here and to share their culture with over 1,000 individuals volunteering on this piece to get it done. And the fifth piece is Leisure Tower, which is that came right after 360 Degrees Vanishing, which was a partnership with Interfaith Ministries, UNICEF, and the Levant Foundation. The film takes you on kind of a photo journey of my work, beginning in 2001, and goes through all of the work that I worked on throughout the Eastern Cape of South Africa and the 2 years of Johannesburg. There are 3 projects that are not mentioned in the film that I would like to mention here because I think they're important. The first is a project that was funded by the Nelson Mandela Foundation, which was called New Imaginations for School Uniforms, which was a project involving students from a very rural part of the Eastern Cape and a recent fashion graduate, whereby we basically reimagined ideas for their school uniforms through the students, where they came up with the ideas of how, if they had a choice, how they could go dressed to go to school. And they came up with the ideas, and through courses through their high school, we showed them how to create those uniforms through patterns and walked them through the whole process. And the actual uniforms was actually on exhibition at the Nelson Mandela Museum. The one in the rural area, there are actually 2. There's one in Mthatha, and there's another much more beautiful museum. I can't remember the name of the city, but it was on display there. And it was also part of an exhibition whereby Harry Belafonte came to South Africa and gave $1 million to the Nelson Mandela Foundation. And it was on view for this event as well. Another project that I worked on that's not a part of the film is the Sustainable Skills Development Project with the Canadian International Development Agency, whereby I was on the advisory board of it. And I worked with them to create a conference for rural leaders to benefit from the World Cup. And it was the only conference about it, actually. so that this rural part of the country wouldn't be left out of all of the FIFA programs. Turns out in the end, they were kind of left out anyway, but we tried. Another project was the Walter Sisulu University Academic Regalia, where I did a master class in gown making, which we actually did a posthumous gown for Walter Sisulu himself, and it was given to his wife. And on top of that, I did the complete academic regalia for that university. It's still in use right now. So without further ado, I guess we'll go ahead and climb into the film. And it moves pretty briskly, you know, lots of images. I'm sure that there should be questions after, but I was very moved going back down the journey myself and looking at the images, putting this film together. It actually brought me to tears. Enjoy. My name is Selven O'Keef Jarmon. I'm a visual artist and fashion designer. I engage in the making of social sculpture in that I invite public participation into my process. I introduced this type of work into my visual frame in 2001 when I decided I wanted social consciousness to operate within my creative space. The genesis of this began with a collaborative piece with artist David Wayne McGee, which was called The Ballad of Here and Now. This work was part of the Art and Context curriculum at the Rhode Island School of Design. The project involved the university art students and individuals drawn from Olneyville community in Rhode Island. For this work, I introduced a sculpture-informed wardrobe for two individuals premiering a performance to complement the painting exhibition of David Wayne McGee at the museum. In 2003, I embarked on a 30-day fact-finding mission to South Africa as a means of investigating how my social conscious-driven ideas could fit into this fresh new democracy. The life and work of Nelson Mandela was, first and foremost, a part of my interest in that country. This trip turned into a 7-year live-work stint in the country, with me living 5 years in the Eastern Cape and 2 years in Johannesburg. My first significant work, informed by South Africa, was exhibited at the Contemporary Arts Museum in Houston in 2006. The title of the piece was called The Names on the Deed. At the time it was created, the narrative of this work jumped straight ahead into the next level of contention in the country that speaks to the culture, economics, and the land. One of the most prevalent things that stood out throughout my travels in South Africa was the fact that every major city or town was preceded by a large township or shanty home as a kind of welcome mat to the city, a sort of leftover gift from the previous dispensation. Other things noted were a great many of names of the towns, cities, bridges, mountains, and streets had Eurocentric names, mainly German, Dutch, and British. This piece embodied those observations. In many respects, it reflected my feelings at the time of being in a house that someone owns, wherein the things within it belong to someone else. By this period, Nelson Mandela had already served his one term as president and ceded the presidency to Thabo Mbeki. As their democracy moved forward, some individuals in the world already began collecting Nelson Mandela as a type of trophy piece, devoid of the human rights, humanity, and racial equality he stood for. In flipping this into a U.S. context, it is a perfect parody having the Nelson Mandela exhibition on view at the Holocaust Museum at this very time in the United States when our own much older democracy is under assault from within. The fact of this behavior only adds credence to the importance of Nelson Mandela's exhibition and exhibitions like this. Another project I worked on during my last 2.5 years in South Africa was called Quanda. The Quanda project was a national reality TV series based out of Johannesburg. The narrative of this series asked the question, if you were to make your community look better, feel better, and work better, how would you go about doing it, taking into consideration that government can't solve all of your problems? This question was posed to individuals from 6 different communities, and their answers and actions formed the content for the series. I created the visual fashion content for this 13-series project that aired weekly on primetime TV. The project involved 100 individuals from 6 different rural communities representing 6 different provinces, about 600 individuals in all. Within the scope of this project, I hired 6 recent graduates from South African schools of fashion to couple them with a specific sewing community, 1 per province, with the requirement that they had to speak the language of that province. This was a strategic mitigation given South Africa is a country of 9 provinces and 13 different languages working within the country. In addition to doing the wardrobes for the series, we also created a Quanda collection shown at Fashion Week South Africa in Johannesburg, sewn by the sewing groups from the 6 different provinces. 360 Degrees Vanishing is a large-scale beaded sculptural installation mounted into the front building at the Art League, Houston. The piece was installed June 2019, located at Montrose Boulevard and Willard Street. The project reimagines the possibilities of beading while placing it into a Western context. It involved 16 rural beaders from South Africa who traveled to Houston, ages 18 to 73, in groups of 4 and 5, and funded by the Eastern Cape government. They lived and worked in Houston over a period of 7 months as artists in residence and lived at the Art League Houston house. The piece is informed by the notion of beading vanishing as a traditional art form, due in part to young people leaving rural areas for urban ones seeking better economic opportunities. Throughout the time, we beaded with over 1,000 individuals in different locations around the city, including the Art League Houston, Rice University, Project Row Houses, Burmac Studios, the Houston Public Library downtown, the Covenant House, Episcopal High School in Bel Air, Smither Park, and several other places. The youngest person beading with us was 5 years old, and the oldest was 78. This collective group of volunteers represented at least 8 different countries. Inasmuch as we were creating a physical beaded tapestry, we also created a human tapestry bound by conversations and exchanges with individuals on topics focused on culture and things vanishing from societies. The South Africans returned home with a newfound value proposition regarding their craft. Since getting the piece mounted, I've been working on a series of drawings about the 360 Degrees Vanishing project called the Beaumont Drawings. These drawings are a microcosm of the larger beaded wall, personified on a smaller scale. This work draws attention to the word wall and what walls have come to represent. The bare mention of the term wall at the moment brings to focus the border wall, aimed at keeping people out. The walls within the scope of these drawings reminds the viewer of the many walls created by different hands that help shape humanity, such as the humanity within the 360 project. My recent social sculpture piece, which was completed 2019, is called Leisure Tower. 2003, I started spending time in South Africa. While working there on various projects, I just began to collect a lot of beads. You know, I'd see people on the side of the street beading these incredible things. Little by little, I began to see that they just weren't there anymore. And I began to ask, well, where are the beaders? After a little bit, someone responded to me and it's like, well, Selven, you know, they're just not coming back because, you know, they're going on to other things. There's a chance that a couple of generations into the future, this won't exist anymore because people won't know how to do it. I wanted to do a project that kind of addressed that, you know, with these beads. And I saw these beads as just a material, you know, just a medium. So I just wondered if I took this idea out of its natural habitat and landscape and placed it into a different context, especially if I could like transport some of these beaders to another culture and have a broader conversation about things vanishing from people's culture. And that's how this came about with the beads. I was approached by Levant Foundation
She talked to me about wanting to do a project with refugees. And so I started somehow thinking about what it must feel like for someone to travel hundreds of miles to come to a place based on an idea in their minds, what that place is, what that place represented. And I started thinking about the word leisure as it related to that, because leisure is just such an expansive word. I mean, you break it down and it's anything from, idle time, freedom, respite. I began to imagine for a person, that's leaving a space fraught with all kinds of detriment, and they're looking for another place in their mind that gives them a certain sense of hope or freedom. I came up with the idea of thinking about a rocking chair. Those two dynamics by itself in its own minimal way conjures up a sense of idle time, relaxation, and fits into the broader word of leisure. So I proposed to the Levant Foundation to do this social sculpture piece of these 7 rocking chairs that spells out the word leisure with towering backs, and I named it Leisure Towering. The whole beaded part of it, was the part that I was proposing to do with the refugees from the different places. It was the Interfaith and UNICEF that brought the people together from these different countries. I think the countries represented was Iraq, Syria, Yemen, Guatemala. It was 13 countries represented, 22 different languages, 60-something people in all. It's pretty dynamic. First of all, the room at Interfaith Ministries was just incredible. That gave me a lot of variance in terms of what I could do with that room, with so many people from different backgrounds. That was kind of the first thing that we factored into the equation, was like, how do we get people to work together when they're really strangers?
Good job, excellent.
Some of the outcomes were just so crazy incredible. And I say that because these were things that I could not have written into the proposal, that just kind of blew me away. Now, which probably made this beading session the best that I've ever experienced, ever. This was a kind of an uncontrolled setting, there was so much potential for anything to kind of happen, with people not knowing each other, the different age groups from 5 to 17, I believe. And then the facilitators themselves, everything was moving just so smoothly and so wonderful, and just like a charm, it's working. And then something magical happened where the rep from UNICEF came up with this brilliant idea to invite people up to the podium to introduce themselves, say what country they were from, and to pick a song and play it. Interestingly enough, here we are listening to music from all of these different places, and you begin to see this whole cultural phenomenon. If people weren't already communicating, they were during the process of this. And before that was all done, people were dancing with each other and communicating in ways that they hadn't already, and the work continued while this was going on. That was magic to me. This is social sculpture, where you're inviting people into the process to make this piece. First, it's like what was made, this thing, this object, but it's like who actually took time to bead all of these beads and put this together? And so it feeds into the narrative of what it is. And with this Leisure Tower, it definitely feeds into it, because we're actually talking about the very people whose hands participated in making it. The 2 Syrian kids that were beading, they started off beading, and they were just so happy being there, and of course that was candy, that was food, and that was candy, and so they kept going back to the candy table, eating candy. I guess the sweets kicked in, and they needed to move around, and so for the rest of the day they beaded some, and then they were just running around happy. That was meaningful to me. A couple of reasons. They were probably 6 and 7, something like that. And I know how long the Syrian war has been going on. So I saw that, and it was like, probably all their life, the only thing they've ever known was probably the war that's been going on. And so For me, seeing this happiness and seeing them run around, and also the look in their eyes, this sincerity and feeling comfortable to go up to anybody and ask anything, the freedom to do that was very meaningful to me. Everyone, I think, could use good memories, things to remember your childhood, you know, help you to expect good things in your life based on it. And this was the same thing. I would hope that this project will be reflective in that way, that they'll think back on it. I remember at this point in time, we had this great experience, and that they would share it with other people.
So here we are.
Well, I'm going to cry now. That was an amazing project.
Oh, thank you.
And tell me about the beads themselves. I was curious about that. You know, you can see they glass, or what are they made of? How did you find the beads?
Well, actually, the beads are acrylic. They have a glass-like quality. They're translucent. And it was important to me that I resource materials from the United States, because I was talking about things vanishing from people's culture. It was very difficult. The company that I found was the last one in existence in the United States, which is in Rhode Island. And they were wonderful people. They actually became a partial funder of the project, in kind sponsor with some of the beads. So that's where I got the beads from.
It's really, really interesting. Well, I wanted to open it up for Q&A during this time. So if anyone would like to submit some questions for Selven, we'll be happy to ask those. I do have a couple to get started here. I was wondering, what drew you to South Africa in the first place?
Well, as I said, in 2001, the World Trade Center bombings, and the project that I was working on, the Ballad of Here and Now, which was kind of a community-based project. It didn't start off that way. I mean, Rhode Island School of Design, RISD acronym, they presented something much different to David McGee, and he chimed back with another idea that he felt like made more sense. Their idea was very inclusive of the artists within the institution, and that was it. And he's like, well, okay, how about if we open this up and include individuals from another community? And he came up with another idea and they bought it. And me participating in it, it's like mentally, I just made this connection between what's happening in the world as it relates to the World Trade Center bombings, and just the fact that there are people out there that wanted to kill me, and I didn't know it. Who knew in this kind of way? It was that kind of feeling. And I just felt like I wasn't sure I wanted to do fashion anymore. Throughout the scope of me doing the piece, and I was working in a library that was an auditorium in a library that nobody was using, had a Steinway piano pushed to a corner, and that became a metaphor for the world around me. You know, here we have valuable things in existence at our fingertips that are no longer useful anymore, you know, and pushed in corners. And I came to the realization of, yes, I did want to continue in fashion, but I just needed to find a way to incorporate social consciousness into my work.
I see.
And I thought about South Africa as a way for me to go about doing it. My sister had just got back from there working with Habitat for the Humanities on her vacation. And when I was talking to her about it, she's like, Selven, you should consider South Africa as a place to go, just to visit. And things came together for me to go on a fact-finding mission there for 30 days. And it was all history that turned into 7 years of work.
Well, we have a question here. Can you tell us more about the concept of being a social sculptor?
Sure. Well, the idea for me wasn't contrived. And I say that because it's easy to look at a work and just say, I'm going to just go and start doing that. And doing that is very different from doing that, if you know what I mean. Because as a creative person, I had never really invited people into the divine space of creation where I make stuff. That's where the ideas happen, and that's where I make it, and you get a chance to see it once it's done. And there's a security in that, because art making is kind of vulnerable. You really are pulling from an interior space where your ideas are sometimes not, you don't even know what it is yourself. Mm-hmm. And so when you open it up and where you're inviting the public into that space, that creative space, you're opening up all kinds of other things in it. And social sculpture is that. You're opening up parts of it to the public, and you get a chance to decide what part you're going to open up. And it's different from one sculptor to another, or one individual, one creative person to another. It depends on what they're doing. In many ways, the 360B project was very different from the Quanda project because I was invited into that. But the reason that I was invited into it, because I was already doing it in the East UK with the Nelson Mandela Foundation, with the New Imaginations for School Uniform. So in many ways, the craft came before the title. In fact, someone had to tell me what it was. I didn't know what it was.
Well, tell me about, where does this creativity come from the standpoint of when you were growing up? How did you get your start? Where did it come from?
That's a hard question, actually. I can't say. I can say this. My mom, all of my aunts were seamstress and hat makers. So I say that, in fact, they taught me how to make hats. That's and I guess that was some kind of corollary that I could hold it on to that allowed me to just flow up that stream into other interests. And it went from me studying music for 13 years, with the Foundation in Music Composition, to me just being a person that loved visual art and deciding that I wanted to do it, first starting through fashion. Mm-hmm. And the way that I did fashion, which was somewhat off-center from the traditional straight-ahead fashion, although I embraced that too. So that's the closest I could get to the answer of that question.
That's interesting. And then tell us about your next community project. Do you have something in the works right now?
Well, actually, there is a conversation. I have to admit, during this Quanda pandemic, this COVID pandemic, me being a studio artist, it's like I basically get it done by inviting people into the studio. That can't happen anymore, so I had to shut all of that down. but I'm currently working on a body of work called In Memoriam. It is not opened up. It is a very personal kind of work that I'm doing uh, about how I'm feeling right now, and also relating to a story that my mom told me, during George Floyd's funeral, where I was having a conversation with her, and I was just sharing. I was like, "Mom, I felt like I was on the front pew of the service," and she said, "I felt that way too." But she went on to tell another story, um, saying that this reminds me of when my brother was lynched. And she went on, and I became quiet, and I listened to the story. And the strange thing about the story was I'd never heard it before. And it just changed things. It immediately connected a past that I didn't know about, a personal part of a past that I didn't know about, that someone felt so close to that they didn't want to reveal. And I connected it to a present, because at the same time, what was happening and is happening in the world. So that's what I'm working on now, is a body of work called In Memoriam that kind of speaks to this idea of individuals that seem to be just leaving a planet, going places, and in front of a, how do I say, barely curious public that's not really completely embracing the idea of what's happening around us. So that's a piece that I'm working on, but I'm also in conversation with South Africa about the next thing. And I will say that it involves a bridge, and it is the next iteration of the work. I mean, I went from going to South Africa, working with communities there, and then bringing South Africans to the United States. The next part of the journey would be to work on something that actually brings people from the United States to South Africa for another project. So that's something that I'm in discussion with them about right now. We just need a little bit better time to be able to speak in person and to have those conversations in person. But I will say this, having access to information like this, it's glad to note that this piece will be available, because things like this happen. It helps in the conversations when you're talking about projects in South Africa.
Like you said, it's extremely visual, right? I mean, you have to see it to understand it.
Yeah.
And I wanted to share something with you, is that with the Mandela exhibition being here, we've reached out to a lot of Black churches here in Houston. And something that I learned, which I thought was absolutely fascinating, I was not aware of it, is every single Black church that we were connecting with and meeting the folks and the administration all told us about South African programs that they supported. So here we're meeting with all these leadership members of the churches, and almost every one of them had been to South Africa multiple times, which was so fascinating to me. And what a great connection for Houston with your work. So maybe that's something that we can talk about, doing an initiative between Holocaust Museum Houston and these incredible churches that are supporting South Africa, and work with you to do something together. I think it might be fun.
I would love that. I would absolutely love that. The connection is whatever's in your head, multiply that times probably 20.
Uh-huh.
It's very large. And living there for the time that I did, I saw how large it was. I'm talking about from all around the country. In fact, there's a very large African American community in South Africa, in Johannesburg, that I know of. Let me just say this. People that travel to South Africa have a tendency to migrate to the larger cities, Johannesburg, Durban, and Cape Town. And I understand that it's easier there, but I want to also say that me spending the time in the Eastern Cape was the perfect place to start. And me being a urban kid, I am totally an urban person. Being in these rural settings was was difficult. It was a hard commitment to be there for those 5 years. But I can honestly say that was the perfect place to be to see how South Africa works. It is the genesis of everything. In fact, most of the leaders around Nelson Mandela, they were all from the Eastern Cape.
Yes, yes, that's true. Well, I have another question. Why beading? Why did you choose that medium?
Well, I will say the medium chose me. Um, I mean, I first gravitated to the products that were made from beads. That was the entrance point to it. I was just a collector.
Hmm.
I wasn't beading anything. I was just a collector of these beautiful objects that I found in South Africa, and it was fascinating to me.
Mhm.
And I collect them. In fact, the the little money that I had, I would sometimes, be in situations that was very vulnerable because you're like, okay, you spent all your money on beads, you have a problem. It was an addiction. So it wasn't until I got into real conversations, first with a specific person who actually was a part of the bead project. She was like my co-partner on the South African side. She was the director of the craft hub in Mthatha. Um, and she was the one that laid it out to me how beading could vanish from the landscape because fewer and fewer people were doing it. Because I asked her, it's like, well, Kulewa, I can't find this and this and this anymore. And she laid it out. And so there was the inroad there to beading. It wasn't about, I mean, to beads. It wasn't really about beads. It was about it being connected to something larger because I couldn't imagine the culture of this idea of people beating that could vanish because people just stopped doing it, not realizing the implication thereof.
And how important it is
Yeah,
culturally, right?
yeah,
Yeah, it's just beautiful. Like the in your film, those pieces. We actually have a few pieces. We have a lion and we have an elephant, that we purchased here, but they're just exquisite. And I was curious myself because in many ways, when you travel, it's specific to the region. Are there different designs based on where you travel in South Africa? Can you kind of tell us about that?
absolutely. Every part, like I said, South Africa has 9 different provinces. And all of the provinces outside of Gauteng, which is where Johannesburg is, all of them have their own identity. And I pull Gauteng out of it because Gauteng really is, Johannesburg is a melting pot of all the rest of the province of people coming in, from the rural places. And so it's kind of the America of of the place. And their American culture is it's basically a culture of immigrants that brought all their ideas and stuff into that space, and African Americans that brought their identity into it. Um, but each of these places have their own little look. I don't know if some of the viewers listeners may be aware of Esther Mahangu, who is she's from the Indibele area, which is uh, in some ways outside of Johannesburg. It's kind of like going towards the game reserves and towards Mozambique.
Mhm.
There's a part of that culture where they actually paint their houses, in these bold graphic colors. And Esther Malangu was actually here in Houston, and she did a piece at Project Row Houses. And I think it may still be there, sitting there kind of nondescript, this graphic little wall that she painted. But every area has its own look, and they guard their look, and they'll tell you, oh no, that's definitely Xhosa, or that's Zulu, or that's Ndebele, or you know. But yes, you're right. They do have their different looks, and there are different ways of beating and process as well.
So, from the standpoint of your experience in South Africa, did you generate some new? I was in particular very interested in that fashion show. And so I wondered about those designs. Did you carry some of those designs in your own work here to the United States, or what happened with those designs in that show? They were beautiful.
Thank you very much. No, I did not carry any of those designs into my work. Some of that work was sold here in Houston from the collection as it was. That was not an easy thing to do. I mean, okay, imagine these six fashion designers. The process was I set them up at the studio and trying to get them in the same headspace to create a cohesive look. And I basically pulled from magazines and I laid them out and I asked, let's just start drawing from these images, as if we're drawing from collection, just come up with anything. And then we took those collections and we passed them around the table and to see what kind of cohesion we could get from it. It was a good working exercise, but time was running out. So I had to go and pull a very specific look and go, okay, let's look at this. Let's do things around this specific look. And that's how the collection began to come together. And it was important for the collection to be informed by culture. And there were other things like you could only get certain kinds of fabrics there. And it wasn't like being here in the United States where, there were other extremities that fit into that equation to make it difficult. But hey, we're creative people and, we look at what we have to work with and it's from there that we started the creation process.
Which makes it so unique, right?
Yeah.
In fact, I wanted to ask you, what happened to the rocking chairs? Where are they?
They are in storage waiting for someone to buy them or to exhibit them or, they're there waiting. They were actually exhibited at the Texas Southern Museum, and they were also exhibited at Interfaith Ministries. So it's just a matter of places for them to be seen. They're waiting.
That's wonderful. Let me see if I have one more question on here. Oh, yes. The question is, how did your work lead to change in those communities where you were working?
That's such a good question. I'm going to start with the 360 project, because that was the big one. And I think the fact of these 16 leaders coming over to the United States, I can't tell you how big of a deal that was. The South African government, the Eastern Cape government had never did anything like that before, ever. It was just unheard of. And I'm saying this from the individuals that participated. And these individuals, the criteria for them to be a part of that group, I had nothing to do with it. They came from several different municipalities, and the municipalities funding it, they put together their own criteria. We did set forth the age group. So to begin with, the answer to the question is for them to actually be able to come and to work on this big project and to go back. They went back with a different kind of value system as it relates to what they do. They went back with a Eastern Cape government and the government, because at this point, the national government knew about the project because of the press. They went back to a government that looked at what they did in a different kind of way. In fact, a year after that, they had selected several of them to go on a trip to China for something that related to exploring opportunities because they beat it the way that they did. There was another opportunity for them to go to another country in Africa. It's the one that always escapes me. It's in Western Africa, Burkina Faso, to a festival that they do. There was also the one beater that hadn't graduated from high school, and she had a child. She was the youngest one. And she was so shy when she came. And when she went back, in fact, her parents almost didn't let her go because her aunt had told her that she would be trafficked, and you know, it was very difficult. And she went back, and the aunt paid for her to go back to school,
Oh,
and
wonderful.
to get her education. From the younger readers, seeing or younger individuals, looking at this and seeing that these beaters got a chance to go to the United States as like this newfound interest in beating. You mean I can do this and have this kind of access. Um, those are some of the things. While I was living in the Eastern Cape working on the Sustainable Skills Project, although um, it didn't happen where FIFA uh, embraced the Eastern Cape as a place, but it did happen that the bags that the crafters were making, which were these wonderful beaded bags that they sold at the conference,
Oh my God.
became a hit item. So uh, they were able to make hundreds of those bags for a whole lot of people, so there was some economic benefits from projects like that. I could go on and on and on. It's the whole Quanda project,
Uh-huh.
the outcomes from that with these designers, having access now because they've worked on this piece. And one of the big things that I motivated for the designers was income, because I had to write the proposal for them within the scope of the project. And when the money started going a little bit to the left after we went through the first piece of the money for this big television project, they looked at my whole program within it as a place to cut. And things like, Selven, you're paying your designers more than our pharmacists make here. And it's just too much. Well, I put it a little bit on the curve, because hey, their work was a lot. It was very intense. It was lots of traveling. They had to leave, their families and be a part of communities in rural areas. And we worked a lot of hours. I mean, that was we did some overnighters, so at least I could say they were well paid for it. So.
Well, I wanted to thank you, Selden, for being here and sharing your incredible work and the film as well, and just having the opportunity to demonstrate how you can make a difference in South Africa through art and through culture, and also your whole attitude towards activism through art. I think it's so wonderful that people, like you said, they benefit not only from its beauty, but also through the sense of community that you created in every single one of your projects, which is, life lasting. They'll never forget that experience. So thank you for your fine work. And I promise you that we will definitely have you come back when this COVID is over, and we'll have an interactive project and do something with you, because I would really enjoy it. Besides, I love to bead, so I want to be right there on that table doing the beads with you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Well, it's so nice to meet you. And thank you again to our members for participating this evening. And you have a very nice night. So thanks again. Take care.
Take care. Good night.
Good night.